Welcome. I'm Randy Cross, and this is Unsafe Spaces. This is actually our Season 2 finale, Episode 23. And it'll be the last one of this season, and not coincidentally, we're going to start Season 3 right about the time everybody's going back to football, to camp, and to preseason games and everything else over the next week or so. So we're going to be doing that. We want to know what you want to hear about, what you want to talk about. What are the things that you would like to see on Unsafe Spaces? We got sports, feel good, the commentary, everything. The Wambulance used to be butthurt. But what is it that you want to see? And a reminder on that, what you would want to do is send an email to producer@unsafespacesUSA.com. That's producer@unsafespacesUSA.com. Putting this out now here in the finale of Season 2, so when we get to Season 3, what we do here at Unsafe Spaces reflects not only what we want to talk about and what we want to hear, but also what you want to hear. All right? Again, that's producer@unsafespacesUSA.com. Thank you. Let's move things right along. Next up is going to be our interview with the man that publishes what I refer to as the Bible of college football, Phil Steele. And we're now joined by Phil Steele. And for those of you that know, and hopefully this will be informing some of you, he produces this. And this is, I think, what I refer to often as the Bible of college football. More information than I'll ever know about college football is contained in the pages of this unbelievable magazine Phil puts out every single year. And if you're a real college football fan, you know the name Phil Steele. Phil, welcome.
Hey, Randy, how the heck are you today?
I'm doing fantastic. I was, and I'm holding this up, Phil. I know this is not a two-way video, but I've got all my little Post-it note marks for conferences and people, and it's not quite as dog-eared as it will be here in a few months, but I love this thing. You did, as always, you over-delivered with this one.
Well, I appreciate that, Randy. It takes a full 6 months for us to put that magazine out. We start the Sunday after Thanksgiving and send out the last page right at the end of May. So we get all those late transfers. This year I talked to over 100 of the head coaches, all post-spring exit interviews. So got a lot of late transfers. We've got Joe Burrow, the starting quarterback for LSU. Some of the other magazines, which hit the shelves a lot earlier than we do, have him as the backup quarterback at Ohio State. So coming out later, I think it gives us a nice advantage.
Yeah, it is amazing, the amount of information. My favorite part about your magazine, especially when it's being read by somebody that maybe hasn't seen it as often or isn't as familiar with the acronyms, is the what the heck is, L8Y. Well, come on, common sense. That's the last 8 years.
There you go. And, the good thing, Randy, is now that everybody's texting and abbreviating through texting, can you imagine 20 years ago when this thing hit and I was using these abbreviations? And now I think the people that text have all the abbreviations as well. So I think that helps out.
Yeah. Hey, I'd like to start. Let's sort of take a cruise through major college football with you and start off here. I was at the College Football Hall of Fame last week for the SEC's meetings. As always, kind of a circus, especially the day that the Pope shows up. And the Alabama football team and the Pope Mobile showed up on Thursday this time. It was a sight to behold, as usual. But how do you look at the SEC this year?
Well, everybody's looking at it as Alabama versus Georgia as a rematch, and so am I, right, at this point. I mean, when you look at Alabama, They are a team that normally comes into my experience chart, Randy, at like number 126 or number 120. They lose so many players in the NFL. This year, they actually come in number 50 on my experience chart. My experience chart takes into a lot of things into account: offensive line career starts returning, percentage of yards returning, letterman returning, percentage of defensive tackles returning. All that's factored in. So it's an experienced Alabama team with two very capable quarterbacks, in Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Hurts. And then you look at that schedule. Alabama's going to be a double-digit favorite in every single game this year. Now, Nick Saban's only had one undefeated national title. He sure has it laid out for a second one this year. I think his main contender in the West is going to be Auburn. They've got the talent to play with them. Defensive front, one of the best in the country. Jarrett Stidham back at quarterback. Question marks for Auburn will be on the offensive line and in the running back core. Remember what happened last year after Kerryon Johnson went down. Mm-hmm. They struggled in both their postseason games. And then the schedule. They have to play Washington and Atlanta, go at Georgia and at Alabama, as well as playing Mississippi State on the road. And the only other team I have right at the top there with a shot at it would be Mississippi State. They have got one of the most experienced teams in the country with 17 returning starters coming back. They've got my number 3 rated defensive line and Nick Fitzgerald at quarterback. But the last 2 times they played Auburn, they got blown out. They do have to play at LSU, at Alabama. So I'm going with Alabama in the West. Really going out on a limb there, huh, Randy?
Absolutely. Hey, in the East, everybody's got Georgia, and you have Georgia. And I love what Kirby Smart has done. And how could you not? And he's got sort of he's developing that Alabama kind of embarrassment of riches when it comes to depth and whatnot. But how do you look at Georgia versus a team like Florida?
Yeah, there's 2 teams I think can contend with Georgia in the East this year. And the reason why is when I look at this year's Georgia squad, I actually think it's still one of the best squads in the country, no doubt. I've got number 4 in my power poll. But they're a notch below last year, just a notch, because you look at them defensively. Last year they had 10 returning starters. This year they only have 5. They lose Roquan Smith. I think their defense goes from being one of the top 2 in the country to maybe number 14 in the country, which is still outstanding, but it's not one of the top 2. And offensively, while I love DeAndre Swift, and I think running behind the number 2 offensive line in the country, he's going to have a massive season. Keep in mind, last year he was the number 3 running back. So they had Chubb, Michelle, and Swift. This year it's Swift, and then they need a couple guys to emerge. So I think they're a little weaker at running back as well as in the defense. But I've got them favored in all their games. I think the 2 games they have to be on their toes for. Number 1 would be at South Carolina. And when you look at South Carolina last year, they lost their starting running back, Rico Dowdell, 4 games into the season. They lost their playmaker on offense, Deebo Samuel, wide receiver, kick returner, punt returner, scoring touchdowns all over the place. He was gone after 3 starts last year. Those 2 are back. Jake Bentley's back at QB. They're going to more of a hurry-up offense, which really fit Bentley in the spring. Muschamp's defense looks very good this year. And they get Georgia at home week 2. Remember the last 2 years, South Carolina has played Georgia within 14 points. And 2 years ago, here, in Columbia, Georgia returned an onside kick for a touchdown in the final seconds to make it a 14-point game. So I think they have a shot, as does Florida. As you touched on, they're my number 1 most improved team in the country. Last year was a dumpster fire, suspensions, injuries. At one point in November, Randy, they were down 28 scholarship players. That's over a 30-year roster. So they're playing with about 55 scholarship players on the field against teams with full rosters. And this year they've got 19 returning starters. That doesn't even include a player like Jordan Scarlett, who was the leading rusher in 2016 and was suspended last year. Mullen always gets the most out of the talent on hand. He's a quarterback whisperer. I think he'll get the most out of Felipe Franks, Emory Jones, Kyle Trask, whoever wins the job, and also get the most out of the team overall. And then you got to like their schedule. 3 true road games this year in the SEC: at Tennessee, at Mississippi State, at Vanderbilt, all winnable. The Georgia games in Jacksonville. So that's going to be the key. I could paint a scenario here for you that they're 7-0 when they take on Georgia in Jacksonville, and that would be quite a game.
Wow, that would be something. That would really be something. Hey, let's move on to the next conference, the Big Ten. As everybody these days, they've got different parts of their conference. But can you give me the top 3 teams in the Big Ten for fans to keep a close eye on?
Actually, I'm going to have to give you my top 5 teams, Randy, because
All right.
there are 5 legitimate title contenders for that. And, one quick note about the Big Ten. For years I've written the article, Toughest Conference in College Football, and I could have titled that article for 10 years. Okay, we all know the SEC is the toughest conference in college football. Who's number 2? But last year I actually rated the Big Ten number 1. You look at their bowl season, non-conference games, legitimate contenders. They were right up there, and they're up there again. Now, in the East, I think it's a 14 battle. You've got Ohio State. I do think Haskins steps in and gives them a better downfield passing threat than they had with J.T. Barrett. They've got Dobbins and Weber at running back. I think Ohio State's premier team this year. Michigan. Last year Michigan was one of the least experienced teams in the country. 5 returning starters. This year, they jump all the way up to 17 returning starters. One of the top 3 defenses in the country. Shea Patterson steps in at QB, and I think the offense will be much improved. And they're also solid on special teams. Penn State, yes. Barkley is gone, but they bring back Trace McSorley at QB. The defense was deep last year, so despite 3 returning starters, they played a lot of people. I think the defense will still be solid. And when I talked to Coach Franklin this year, he said the offensive line goes to a strength of the team, whereas in the past they've been pretty much a weakness. So that's a big edge. And they play one team on the road that had a winning record that last year in Michigan, a team they clubbed at home. And then don't discount Michigan State, Mark D'Antonio. Last year they were the least experienced team in college football. This year with 19 returning starters, they move all the way up to number 13 on my experience chart. And like Penn State, they play one team on the road that had a winning record last year. That's Penn State in Happy Valley. And then the other team to mention is Wisconsin. Now, I'll say this with Wisconsin. I think they're a better team than last year's squad, which went 12-0 during the regular season. They've got the best offensive line in the country, Jonathan Taylor at running back, who had nearly 2,000 yards as a true freshman, and their quarterback is a veteran in Alex Hornibrook. But keep this in mind. Last year, their 5 road games came against 5 teams that had losing records. This year, their road games are Iowa, in Kinnick, Michigan, in Ann Arbor, Northwestern, Penn State in Happy Valley, and Purdue. 5 bowl teams on the road this year, but they're the clear-cut favorite to win the West, and that makes them a threat to make the playoffs.
All right, let's go move along to the Big 12. Who are your contenders there?
I think you got 6 legitimate contenders. To me, the Big 12 is a wide-open conference. Now, Oklahoma's your favorite coming in. Kyler Murray is not going to put up Baker Mayfield numbers. He's not going to hit 71% with a 42 to 5 ratio like he did last year. But he's got my number 5 set of running backs behind him, number 4 set of receivers, number 5 offensive line. They're still going to be explosive. And right now in Vegas, Oklahoma's favored in every single game. But keep your eyes on Texas. They had the second best defense in the Big 12 last year, 7 starters back there. When I talked to Coach Herman this spring and went over the team, he was livid about how poor the offensive line and running backs were last year. He'll get that fixed. And if he does, it's going to be a potent offense because they got 2 capable quarterbacks, 2 dangerous receivers. TCU, Gary Patterson, the big question marks are inexperienced offensive line, inexperienced quarterback. Defense, best in the Big 12. Receiving core, solid. And Patterson usually does well with inexperienced offensive lines. Plus, he's got my number 3 special teams coming in. They're going to be a dangerous threat. And then the other 3 teams to throw out at you, West Virginia, led by Will Grier, picked by 2nd in the Big 12 media poll this year, and they're going to have an improved defense. They've got 5 starters back after having just 3 starters back each of the last 2 years. Oklahoma State, I think, is the least experienced of these 6 teams that I'm talking about. But here's the thing. You look at their first 6 games. They could win all 6. In fact, they're favored in their first 6 games. And if they do that, that inexperience level goes away. They're a team playing with confidence, and that's when they reach the toughest part of their schedule. And then finally, I'm never going to discount Bill Snyder's chances of getting there. And he's got a veteran offensive line, 2 capable QBs in Alex Delton and Skylar Thompson. So I think any of the 6 teams can get there out of the Big 12 this year. And that's one of the reasons I didn't pick the Big 12 to make the playoffs. I think we're going to see a lot of teams knocking each other off during the course of the year.
Yeah, I threw my production guys a little bit of a curveball here and went to out of order in the conferences. But a team and a conference that I'm impressed with is the ACC. Besides Clemson, and we'll talk about them, but this is a conference that's got a lot of very improved teams.
Absolutely. And, you start with Florida State. And last year, Florida State needed that win over UL Monroe at the end of the season just to qualify for a bowl. But look at their losses last year. I mean, the NC State game, a 6-point loss. Miami gets a touchdown in the final seconds to beat them. They fumble late against Louisville. And Louisville goes and gets a game-winning field goal against them. Clemson, they're down by 3 in the fourth quarter with 6 minutes to go and have the ball on the Clemson side of the field. Even in a poor season, they got close. This year, they get their quarterback back in DeAndre Francois. And when I talked to Coach Taggart this year and went over the team with him, he's very pleased with the talent he's inherited. And he'll toughen these guys up a little bit, brings in that new offense, which is going to be exciting. They get Clemson at home. I think that makes them a legitimate contender. Boston College, one of my favorite teams. I love defense running game, Randy, and you got to love good offensive line play. And they've got one of the better offensive lines in the country. I rate it number 6. The defense solid in all areas. And then how about A.J. Dillon? They were a different team once he took over at running back. I think he's going to be outstanding this year. And if BC, I think, is your surprise contender on that side. Now, on the other side of the ball, I went with chalk there. I went with Miami of Florida to make it. 7 returning starters on offense, 7 on defense. I think this year's team is better than last year's team, which got to the ACC title game. And remember, they were missing some key offensive players down the stretch last year when they lost their final 3 games. If they can stay healthier on offense, I think they're a threat.
That's great. That's fantastic stuff. How about we go out to my old haunt? In fact, my old haunt was the Pac-8. But now it's the Pac-12. How do you see things going out there? And is there more than one team that can be a legitimate contender coming out of the West?
I would put Stanford and Oregon both up in that class, but I think the Pac-12 probably has to hang its banner on Washington this year, making the playoffs. And, you look at the North. The North is a conference that might have the best 3 teams in the league in it. Washington for starters, 17 returning starters this year. Jake Browning went from 43 touchdown passes 2 years ago to just 19 last year. I think he regains his 16 form. They got Myles Gaskins, who's had 3 1,300-plus rush seasons, 9 starters back on defense. They got my number 8 offense in the country, number 5 defense in the country, led by that secondary. I think they're a threat. If they get past Auburn in the opener in Atlanta, not exactly a neutral site there, but if they win that, they'll be favored in all the rest of their games. They're the Pac-12's best shot. But watch Stanford. David Shaw's done a great job recruiting. They have a tough early schedule, and they're less experienced. I'm never going to discount his chances. And they got some guy in the backfield you might have heard of, Bryce Love. And he's running behind my number 4 set of running backs or offensive line in the country, KJ Costello at QB. The defensive, when I talked to Coach Shaw this spring, he loves their linebacking core, one of the best in the country. And that's really the key to their defense every year. I rate it to number 4. And then special teams, number 2 in the country. They do have to play USC early, at Oregon, at Notre Dame, at Washington, but they're capable of accomplishing that. And then the sleeper over there is Oregon. Oregon's a team that has 14 returning starters, and last year with Justin Herbert at quarterback, they averaged 52 points per game. Without him, 15. I've never seen that big of a difference with one quarterback on a team. And this year, they get Washington at home in Autzen Stadium, and they get Stanford at home in Autzen Stadium. And Autzen's one of the tougher venues in college football, so they'd be my dark horse over there. And as far as the South goes, I think you're looking at USC, Utah are probably your main 2 teams. Utah does get USC at home, which gives them a leg up, but they also have to play each of the top 3 teams out of the North, whereas USC avoids Washington and Oregon. So the scheduling advantage goes to USC, but I think those 2 teams are both very talented this year.
All right, when it comes to independence, it's all about, I guess, the version in college football of the Dallas Cowboys and America's team, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. What kind of a team does Kelly put on the field this year?
I like this squad. In fact, last year, Notre Dame was coming off a 4-win season. So I made them my number 1 most improved team in the country, a team I expected a large increase in the record. And they went from 4 to 10 wins. Remember at one point last year, they were number 3 in the country when they traveled to face Miami of Florida on the road, and they were favored in that game. Now, they lost 2 of their last 3. They lost to Miami, they lost to Stanford, and they're sort of off everybody's radar right now. But here's the thing I like about the Irish. They got 9 returning starters on defense. Offensively, Winbush is back at QB, and from all reports, a much improved passing quarterback this spring. The offensive line, despite losing a pair of first-round draft picks, still looks solid. I think they may have a pair of first-round draft picks this year as well, and I like the skill players. And then look at their schedule this year. It's tough, but it's sneakingly winnable. They have to play their 4 road games, true road games. They're at Wake Forest, at Virginia Tech, at Northwestern, at USC. I actually have them favored in all 4. Toughest 3 games of the year are Michigan, Stanford, and Florida State. They get Florida State in the cold in November. That's a nice plus. I think the Irish can sneak in there. They're my number 1 surprise team in the country, and a surprise team is a non-top 10 team that I think can make the playoffs.
Hey, Phil, last year, the surprise team overall was UCF, coming out of the group of 5, out of the American Athletic, to be more specific. Besides UCF, who brings back Mackenzie Milton and a good number of people, anybody else coming out of the group of 5 that you think can grab the national attention and are a threat for a major bowl?
Yeah, the one that I've got projected to get the group of 5 bid this year is actually Boise State. And Boise State last year, probably fortunate to win the Mountain West. They had a couple of late comebacks where they, one game they were down by 2 touchdowns with about 2 minutes to go. Surprisingly got the Mountain West title game awarded to them after losing at Fresno. But this year they don't need any of that. 10 returning starters on defense. In fact, going over the team with Coach Harsin, they've got one of my top 25 defenses in the country. Offensively, Brett Rippon back at QB, Alexander Madison, 1,000-yard rusher back at running back. The offensive line looks solid. And then you look at their schedule. Now, I talked earlier about Oklahoma State. Mm-hmm. They're a slight dog at Oklahoma State week 3, but Oklahoma State's inexperienced. They get them early in the year. They can win that game. And if they do, knock off Troy and Oklahoma State early and run the table. I've got them favored in every game this year, besides that Oklahoma State one. Then all of a sudden you're looking at a potential 12-0, win the Mountain West title game, 13-0 champ that has a win over Oklahoma State under their belt. I think they'd be much talked about, especially if their wins are dominant like I expect them to be this year.
Fantastic. Hey, Phil, really want to thank you for joining me. And I think the podcast listeners and watchers are a heck of a lot smarter about college football thanks to you.
Hey, Randy, I always enjoy our conversations, my friend. You can call anytime.
All right, Phil. Phil Steele, get that magazine. You'll be much better off as a football fan for it. Thanks. Well, thank you to Phil Steele. That was fantastic. And from a college football standpoint, hey, look on the bright side. We're all just a little bit smarter. Time now for Unsafe Spaces Sports. All right, Unsafe Spaces Sports. Let's kick this off right now with 3 words I've been waiting to hear for a while, and that's football is back. Well, one of the true ways to know that it's going to be back is when all these college conferences start having their media days again. That's all started every year by the SEC, followed by the Big Ten, the Big 12, the Pac12, the ACC, all the conferences in the other 5, let's refer to them as, or as they say, the group of 5, all the way down through all ranges of college football. High school football will be cranking up pretty soon. People are reporting back to training camp in the NFL, preseason games. The Hall of Fame game is right around the corner. And when you're talking about reporting to camp, I guess the big story this week, actually not coincidentally late last night, early today, Julio Jones from the Falcons is going to report to camp because his deal is going to get adjusted. What do you know? He's actually going to make a little bit more money. Was guaranteed 10.5 this year. For most of us out here in the real world, can't really relate as to that not being enough, but he's getting more. And as always in sports, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Well, one wheel that didn't get much grease this last weekend was Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods was pretty good, but when it really counted, again, he didn't produce. He had double bogeys. At one point, he actually led the British Open. But Francesco Molinari, the first Italian to ever win a major in major golf, came through and won the Open Championship. He is now the championship golfer. Fun stuff. Good to see. Too bad Tiger didn't do it, but I'm sure the ratings were unbelievable, and it made a lot of people happy. We've seen the All-Star game in Major League Baseball come and go. Not a bad performance. We saw the Home Run Derby come and go. Bryce Harper won that. Always interesting to see a guy be recognized as an All-Star that's batting .215 and then praise him and honor him for doing something that, I don't know, probably guys off the street could hit home runs. But when it comes to action in Major League Baseball, this picture sums up my feelings pretty well as to what we're getting out of baseball at this point when we get into about the 100-game threshold. A lot of snoozing, a lot of snoring. But look on the bright side for those of you out there that are NHL and NBA fans, because, yes, they're coming back. About 71 days till the puck drops in the NHL. So you can usually subtract about 10, 14 days off of that, and that's when the NBA will be going to their training camps. Right about the end of the NFL training camp is when NBA goes into their camps and start playing their utterly meaningless preseason games, which are only slightly less utterly meaningless than the NFL preseason games. But that's kind of how that goes. But if you're a big fan of those, not long to go. But football is back. Yes. All right, let's go to our Wambulance this week. It's a double-headed Wambulance, matter of fact. Now, remember what this used to be called. It used to be called Butthurt of the Week. Well, this sort of refers to a little bit of the same thing. Yeah, you're not reading that wrong. That gentleman right there was charged with stabbing people. It's just too good. It's another example of headlines kind of writing themselves when it comes to something that jumps out and makes you, in a way, smile. And it's hard to smile about assault, but hey, check this video out.
Artist with no arms stabbed man by grabbing scissors with his feet. A homeless artist who does not have arms stabbed a tourist by grabbing a pair of scissors with his feet, police say. Jonathan Crenshaw, 46, allegedly knifed the man on Miami's South Beach Tuesday, with his victim claiming the attack happened after a visitor from Chicago asked for directions. Crenshaw has claimed that he defended himself after Cesar Coronado, 22, punched him in the head, but has now been charged with aggravated battery with a deadly weapon. According to the Miami New Times, Coronado told police that he was attacked while out for a walk with a female friend, shortly after asking Crenshaw for help. The extent of his injuries is unclear, but police believed his version of the story after that friend offered them the same version of events.
Wow, that's harsh. That's hard. Well, merely a flesh wound, had worse. But I digress. Now, story number 2 here in the Wambulance of the week. Check this little beauty out.
Florida woman allegedly fatally attacked mother after being left out of will. I beat up my mom. Updated July 18, 2018. A Florida woman is accused of beating her 85-year-old mother to death after learning she'd been left out of her will. People confirms. Gabriela Prero, 53, was charged with first-degree murder and aggravated battery of a person over 65 years old in the death of her 85-year-old mother, Luisa Prero, according to an arrest report obtained by People. Prero allegedly told Broward County deputy she killed her mother in a fit of rage over her inheritance.
Whoa. Florida, keep up the good work. It's always nice to know we can rely on you. At time now for next up, and here next up is our feel-good story of the week.
I feel good.
Our feel-good story of the week happens to take place in a Chick-fil-A. I know for some of you out there, Chick-fil-A is just a chicken place. And for others of you out there, Chick-fil-A is a far-right organization that's not open on Sundays because they're uber religious. To me, it's a kind of a chicken place that serves some pretty tasty stuff. And in this case, I think they offered their customers something that we'd all love to just happen across on a more regular basis. Check this story and this gentleman out.
To me, and I proudly stand up next to you and defend her still today. For there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. From the lakes of Minnesota to the hills of Tennessee, across the plains of Texas, from sea to shining sea, from Detroit down to Houston, from New York to LA, there's pride in every American heart, and it's time we stand and say that I'm proud to be an American, for at least I know I'm free, and I won't forget the men who died and gave their right to me, and I proudly stand up next to you and defend her still today, for there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA.
Well, they all liked it. I loved it. Many out there love it. And I understand many of you could watch that and your flippin' head will explode. But you know what? To me, maybe we'll show that again. All right. Want to thank you for tuning in here on the finale of Season 2, Episode 23. Want to remind you, social media-wise, where to find us here at Unsafe Spaces USA. All the normal places. Any messages, like I said in the open, send those to producer@unsafespacesUSA.com. That's producer@unsafespacesUSA.com. Time now for us to say happy trails.
Happy trails to you until we meet again.
Who cares about the clouds when we're together? Just sing a song and think about sunny weather.
Happy trails to you till we meet again.